Welcome to the Mill Creek View, Tennessee podcast with your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of the Mill Creek View newspaper.
Welcome back to the Mill Creek View, Tennessee podcast. We are focusing on the volunteer state and our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community. This time, another great special guest, Mike Battistelli. But first, for more information about the stable of Mill Creek View podcasts, visit us anywhere you get your podcasts and socials at Mill Creek View, Tennessee, Washington, and Florida. More on that in a second. While you're there, please subscribe. It's free, so why not? Welcome to our People in the News episode, where I interview people who are making an impact and are lovers of truth. Today, we are talking with Mike Battistelli. Mike and Kate Battistelli planted roots in Franklin, Tennessee a decade ago. Delighted to make a home among like-minded, patriotic, and freedom-loving friends. For years, Mike and Kate were active professionals in the New York City music and Broadway theater world. He is a professional trumpet player and conductor, musical director on staff at Radio City Music Hall. She's a television and Broadway theater actress and Yul Brynner's leading lady in The King and I for 3 years. Wow, that's a long run. That's an eternity in Broadway career. Daughter Francesca Battistelli is a Grammy and Dove Award-winning singer-songwriter and contemporary Christian recording artist who also homesteads and homeschools her his 6 grandchildren. Coming to the Lord a year after getting married, God called Mike and Kate, literally dared them out of the music and theater world to follow his, amen, prompting into home business, homeschooling, and serial entrepreneurship. Over 40 years of marriage, they experienced the blessing that followed God's prompting to change direction. His dare to step up and step out to believe that God's very best for our lives lies in taking those faith-filled bungee jumps he whispers to those with ears to hear. Mike and Kate frequently speak together at homeschool and other conferences and have a passion for mentoring the younger generation. Kate is the author of Growing Great Kids, Partnering with God to Cultivate His Purpose in Our Child's Life, and best-selling The God Dare, Will You Choose to Believe the Impossible? Run out and buy those. Don't know how you fit that in such a long career, but she did twice. They'll be in the show notes too. You can get them from there. And she is currently working on several additional titles for her publisher. Mike continues to run their family's several businesses and is a respected realtor in the booming Franklin, Nashville, Tennessee market. Mike, thanks for coming on. How are you and Kate today, sir?
Steve, thank you so much for the invitation. I followed your work for some time, and I understand as of today, we're actually neighbors. We live in the same bubble, the same beautiful neighborhood here in Franklin, Tennessee, and we've not yet met. So I hope soon we can do that. But Kate and I
only
are
through the
great.
powers of Zoom have we met so far.
Absolutely.
But don't out me, because they've already come to my house once. Don't let them come again. Let's start in the beginning. I love this area. You love this area. Tell us how you two were successful enough to make Broadway your career. That's not an easy gig to get.
Well, it's almost as if lightning strikes, because there's so many talented people, whether it's the music business or they're actors or in the tech side of things there. Getting an opportunity to work that craft, if God has given you gifts and you've been faithful enough to exercise those gifts. I went to music school. I was a professional trumpet player. After I got a year on the road right after college, and I got that out of my system, I went to teach. I was teaching in Williamstown, Massachusetts at Williams College as an adjunct. I was a high school band director for 7 years. And I got a phone call out of the blue to go to Boston and meet the touring company of the King and I with Yul Brynner. And I got the opportunity to take the job, sold my truck, found a home for my dog, rented my house, and ran away with the circus, if you will. But my then future wife, who I had not yet met, was a girl in her 20s from New Jersey who went out as the understudy to Mrs. Anna, the leading lady in The King and I, under Yul Brynner. And typically understudies in a marquee role like that don't get a chance to go on stage in that role. But the leading lady got pneumonia. Kate went on for a couple of weeks. Leading lady came back. My wife dutifully went back to the chorus, which is what you do. And within about a month, the producers called and said, "We'd like you to do this role. Mr. Brynner has sent the leading lady back to New York, paid her 2-year contract, and wants you to be in the role." So we met, fell in love across the footlights. I did 1 year with that show. Kate did 3 years. we ended up off those shows in New York City. We got married in 1983. And it was literally a year later that we came to the knowledge of the Lord. And we were living in what we thought was the fast lane. We learned in retrospect it was really leading to the breakdown lane. But we got married in 83, met the Lord in 84, and we began what we had hoped to be a large family. We wanted 5 or more kids. God gave us 1. We moved out of New York City, trying not to slant the playing field into the performing arts, because we just knew enough about that we didn't want our kid necessarily. We moved out, listening to really that still small voice of the Lord saying, this is not what I have for you. And he literally dared us out of the business. We moved to Princeton for a few years and eventually down to Florida, where we raised our daughter. But we only have our only child. But as you've said in the intro, she's made us grandparents 6 times. So we're blessed. It just skipped a generation.
That's fantastic. Real life, all about Eve in there, I heard, which is about all I know about Broadway. Not the godly part, however, which, another very rare thing about you, or unusual at least, about you and the entertainment business is you're married 40 years. Only Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell can say that I'm sure of. And I'm not even sure they're actually married. How'd you do it?
And that's true as well, where we wonder, we're not sure. But, we made the move here to Tennessee, literally, Steve, chasing our grandchildren, because, had they moved to the moon, we would probably be looking for real estate on the moon, because to a grandmother, those little grandchildren, as they come along, are irresistible. So we moved here. And as you said, we've been in and out of Westhaven here in Franklin really since 2007. Our daughter signed a record deal before she finished college. We moved her up here. We visited many, many times. And in this neighborhood, her music executive, label execs, her producer lives here. So we were up visiting a lot. And we remember looking around and saying, boy, wouldn't Franklin be a wonderful place to live, especially based upon the experiences that we've had living in many places over the world, over the country, mostly in the Northeast, very liberal. And the business that we were in is not peppered with too many conservatives. And just like in Hollywood, I believe, those who are probably need to keep their mouth closed most of the time, because you could lose work if you declare yourself against the grain, because it's such
that's
a
interesting. We talk a lot here on this show about the politics of the far, far, far left coming out of Hollywood on the West Coast, and of course filmed everywhere on earth now with their woke subject matter, even if Disney and HBO are losing billions. What's the political climate of Broadway like in general?
Well, New York City is very liberal, and I would say most of our friends and colleagues in the business, not so much in the orchestra. And I was a musical director and a conductor, played trumpet, so we were not the onstage folks. The onstage folks are these are kids that work so hard, whether it's dance or singing and acting, and when they get a shot and they get a job that's well paying in Broadway, even off Broadway, they do very little to shake that up and risk. So they don't go against the grain. But also, I would say most of our friends and colleagues in that business, whom we love still, are very liberal and would not be ones that would cozy up to a conservative thought. But we love them nonetheless. So that means that those that are of a different ilk, that believe in fiscal responsibility and smaller government and taking the junk that's currently in school curriculum out of schools, are very few and far between. So we generally are not very comfortable living in those environments. And so we were
are they well educated on the issues? Are they actively social, or do they always just have their gut feeling that, oh, it must be mean old nasty Republicans doing this?
Sadly, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think we're dealing with the after effect of what I really believe is a vast majority of an illiterate electorate, illiterate in that they don't really understand the issues. They've not dug deep. They don't really care to understand. They're just sort of on a path to vote a certain way because that's the socially acceptable thing to do in their circles.
Right. They know what Kim Kardashian wore to the Grammys, but they have no idea what tax policy of this candidate or that policy is.
Yeah.
So during COVID, Everything on the island of Manhattan was completely shut down for a long time, including Broadway going dark, of course. That must have been devastating for the career employees you're talking about on the stages. How did people make do?
Well, of course, we had already left the business and left New York by that time. But yeah, many of our friends, and not just in New York on the Broadway scene, but in the music business, the touring musician business. My daughter happens to be in Christian music, but whether it's country music or secular music, whatever, that shut down. And typically, if you're a creator, if you've written music, or if you've written the Broadway show, or if you have points in a project, those people survived and they did pretty well. But the working folks, golly, on Broadway, the grips, the stagehands, the electricians, all out of work. And in the music business, the road managers, the merch managers, the sidemen, the front of house operators, they were all, it was devastating. And I know a lot of artists who went deep in their pockets to continue to pay their staff, their band, their musician, their sidemen, their staff, their road managers, to keep them going during those lean times. And it really still hasn't quite recovered in spite of what has happened with Taylor Swift's.
Yeah, now there's crime and litter all over again, like the 70s. Were you political in New York, or any family active in politics?
Not really. I kind of kept my head down, although I've always been keenly interested. Kate and I have always joked that that we're probably, I wouldn't say addicted to the news, but we stay keenly attuned to the news and a wide variety. And I like to know the facts. And we probably would be leading a more peaceful and quiet life if we weren't so tuned in to world events. And of course, you know, it has been said that all politics is local. Things don't get way more local than the running for mayor or running for the city council. Here we call it alderman. And knowing what is at stake, and knowing and witnessing really how threatened I think the other side is to this conservative effort to maintain that which we all love about Tennessee, that which we love about our little town of Franklin. And I think if you follow the money, there are people that are becoming well compensated for giving in to some of the unbridled growth that developers yearn for, high density housing and all of that. And the effort to check that unbridled growth and expansion is something that I believe threatens people that are currently in power. It's just like our friends in Washington, D.C. Once power and position comes into play, it changes people. And I think very often what follows power and position is a lot of money. I think I heard a statistic last week. I forget. AOC came to Congress. What is it? Is it 3-4 years ago? Whatever it was. She had like $30,000 to her name. She was either $30,000 in debt or $30,000 to her name. She's now worth $6 million. Where did that come from? How did that happen?
Dianne Feinstein just left $60 million to each of her children, and you know she's only been in politics since I was born.
Exactly.
So you chose to leave the Big Apple. Sinatra said, "If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere." You made it. Your bio said, "God dare you," just like Abraham and Moses. You came to Middle Tennessee with that dare. Hopefully, he didn't say, "I meant Middle East" or something like that. But anyway.
Yeah.
What do you make of this crazy mayor and alderman's race we have here? Early voting began yesterday.
Yeah, it did. You know, I don't dislike the man. Our mayor, Ken Moore, I believe he's been mayor 12 years. He's a nice man. He's personable. He's a church-going man. I think, however, what's happened is that there are pressures, the pressure of power and position. It's certainly not the money, at least overtly. He gets paid a whopping $2,000 a month as mayor. It's a $24,000 a year, part-time job, but he's very personable. He's and I'm sure he's a good ambassador,
a doctor
for the city of Franklin, but he's making decisions that are not representative of his conservative constituency. And there's a lot of evidence of what has happened, not the least of which is that very celebrated tie-breaking vote that he gave at the Board of Mayor and Alderman meeting relative to allowing the permit of a third year of a, quote, family-friendly Pride Festival here in a county park, in public on public lands. And
they have a weak mayor system there, so the mayor really only does break ties. He doesn't do
exactly
anything
right.
else.
So the aldermen, which is our city council, there are 8 members. 4 voted in favor. They're more liberal by virtue of how they've been voting.
Which was a little bit of horse trading behind the scenes as well. It should have been 5-3. Yep,
absolutely, quite a bit of that. And he broke the tie. And the sad thing is that there was very clear evidence of anything but family-friendly behavior at the previous 2 years.
Yeah, they wrote a new ordinance on decency specifically because of that.
Precisely.
And waived their own.
Yeah. And there's a state law now. In fact, I read an article today. I'll bring it up but what's happening in Knoxville. There's a 3-day Pride Fest being planned for
flouting
Friday,
the law,
Saturday, and Sunday. Have you heard about that one?
Yeah, Conservative News said it's flouting the law basically in their faces. But you actually wrote a press release asking, more like begging, for civility. Let me read a piece of it. It's worth reading the whole thing, but here's what you said. And I'll break it up over the course of the conversation. Voters for Fairness and Civility, your group, a newly formed group of residents, today issued a call for a new tone in Franklin's upcoming election, citing an incident at a private, resident-organized candidate forum held September 27th at Westhaven as the most recent example of the urgent need for a change of election rhetoric and conduct. I was there for that. Actually, I was invited to film it, and it's on Rumble for all to see at Mill Creek View Rumble channel. And I had no clue this was actually happening because it was not as much of a thing as they blew up in the press. I did see Phil afterwards and introduced myself since he'd been attacking me all week prior. So I wanted him to at least know who I was, not just some bot. I'm a real person. You say further down, Mayor Ken Moore and his long-term ties with the Democratic Party invited News Channel 5 reporter Phil Williams, a non-resident, to attend the forum. Again, I was invited, but was the rest of the press, he's Nashville, not Franklin News, just for the record, was he not allowed to be there?
Well, that's an interesting point. This was supposed to be a resident-only event. There was supposed to be ID being checked at the door. The chairman of our little resident advisory council, that this one is the government affairs RAC, or resident advisory council, happens to be very liberal, and he didn't even inform his colleagues who had been planning these 2 Wednesdays since January, and they were going to be resident only. There was going to be a forum, very decorum was to be followed. There was no chaos. And yet he unilaterally invited supporters of Ken Moore. And Gabrielle, the other candidate, did invite others outside of the residents of this community. So all's fair in that. But what this other gentleman did was invited News Channel 5's news reader, Phil Williams, who has been viciously attacking Gabrielle on his Twitter feed. I mean, relentlessly. And the thing
for 10 really days straight now, as a matter of fact.
Oh, absolutely. And
may have been responsible for me being banned from Twitter. We don't know. We'll never know.
We think maybe it was he or his minion that got you banned from Twitter. But the sad thing is that's what happened in the aftermath of that is that there's been a lot of name calling, a lot of vitriol. There has been there have been threats, death threats. I know that Gabrielle Hanson's campaign managers had her tires vandalized on 2 occasions.
And she was fired. Yeah.
Yeah. And here we are. I'm sitting in my office in my home, looking out the front windows of my home. And just 5 minutes before I dialed into our meeting today, a neighbor walked by, and my wife noticed that he paused, looked at my campaign signs that are in the front yard for our conservative slate, and he gave it the finger. My wife said, "Sit down, don't do anything." I just went out and I just opened the door and I said, "Can I help you?" And we got into a 2-minute conversation. He was vile, and he ended up. This is our little sleepy neighborhood of Westhaven in Franklin, Tennessee, where I've said, I'm delighted to make a home among like-minded, patriotic friends. And he told me to F off twice.
So much for the civility begging that you were doing in your letter. So I interviewed 3 of the alderman candidates and Mrs. Hanson twice. Yeah. Once as alderman and now once as candidate. But the alderman story, I think, is even more important. You wrote, Mr. Williams is not entitled to an interview with Ms. Hanson, right? Not entitled. She doesn't have to if she doesn't want to, or anyone else for that matter. Okay, luckily me twice. His biased and unprofessional conduct toward Ms. Hansen only serves to reinforce the wisdom of her declining to participate in any interview with him, said Mike Battistelli, co-founder and spokesman of Westhaven Voters for Fairness and Civility. So the group also called on the candidates and their supporters who speak of unity, yet repeatedly refer to opposing candidates as extremists, radicals, divisive, just flipped you the middle finger, and other pejoratives, red flag terms to cease name calling and focus on the issues that are important to Franklin residents. Do you plan on filing some kind of harassment or ethics complaint with Channel 5 and maybe in discovery could find some money changing hands? I don't know. That's got to be a campaign finance violation, I'd think.
Well, I'm going to leave that to those that are more up to date on the law. I've got a thick skin. Within the hour of sending this press release out to all the media, television, radio, newspapers in Williamson County, and all the press and media in Nashville, greater Nashville as well, and all the candidates and a number of supporting groups that are supporting these candidates, a simple call for fairness and civility in the time remaining. We've got 17 days before the election. Yes, early voting began yesterday, runs to the 19th. And you would not believe, Steve, the pushback I've gotten. I got the middle finger, not just literally 5 minutes before we came online today, but within the hour, Phil Williams at News Channel 5 was poking his finger in my eye and making fun of the fact that a simple call, we attacked nobody in this press release. It was a simple call. Hey, can we all just get along? Can we clear up the rhetoric? I love, there was a quote in this press release that you might be getting to, but I want to read it because it really strikes a chord with me. Demonizing those with whom one disagrees, it says, is nothing new. Many years ago, a group considered to be extremists, radicals, divisive, and even dangerous were attacked in similar ways. Today, we call this group our founding fathers. And we're glad for their courageous vision for America and that it prevailed in spite of much opposition from so many naysayers. And those of us that are calling for fairness and civility and to end these divisive attacks simply just want a level playing field. There are many ill-informed, uninformed folks that will be going to the polls this week and next and on election day that don't have all the facts. And They would simply rather sit back in their comfortable complacency with money in the bank and their vacation home and their lake boat on the lake and just believe what they read or hear on the news. And what Phil Williams has done, I don't know the man. He was just celebrated for 25 years with Channel 5 here. And I'm sure he's done very good work over the years as an investigative reporter. But one has to wonder why this obsession that he has with Gabrielle Hansen, because his attacks have been relentless. They've been vicious. One would conjecture, and there's some rumblings that he might actually be getting compensated for doing so from some forces on the other side.
Yeah, I don't take a lawsuit to find that out. We don't know. We're speculating. You are, at least. But now, to be fair and balanced, okay, like to coin a phrase from Fox News, Gabrielle has some legit issues. I mean, she posted campaign flyers on mailboxes. That's a no-no. Some empty houses had signs on lawns. I can't do that. Some questions about her past in Texas and Chicago definitely ferreted out by an investigative journalist named Phil Williams. Name changes in her husband's residency while running for office too. Things that people should know. But 10 days in a row of coverage after coverage with a tick-tocking clock on his Twitter to get people to tune into his show, probably something strange going on there. If he knew it, he could have put it all into one 30-minute segment and called it a day. Now it's basically campaign interference. So she's not the perfect candidate, right?
Right. Yeah, there have been missteps. There's no question. In fact, I would commend people to listen to an interview that aired on Rumble yesterday. Jeremy Slayton, who's a local podcaster, and his handle on Facebook is JSlayUSA, and he has some interesting guests, as do you, Stephen. He did a more hard-hitting interview with Gabrielle yesterday, and he asked a lot of those tough questions, and I was encouraged by how she answered them. She didn't avoid them. It was also followed by a live Q&A on chat. And there were 3 or 4 of us on chat. and we were outnumbered by a number of the trolls on the other side who did nothing more. They didn't ask good questions for the Q&A set. They were just slinging as much negativity and name calling as they possibly could.
They have nothing better to do until their cartoons are on. So that's their gig. Yeah.
Go ahead. And Gabrielle's not a perfect candidate. I'll admit that. She's not a perfect person. Steve, I'm not a perfect person. If you go back 20 years, or 30 or 40 years, there are things that I wish I hadn't done or said. It harkens back to my way of thinking when in late 2016, during the election campaign between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, it was a week or 10 days before the election, and this devastating audio tape came out of Donald Trump groping women and how bad it was. And people were saying, oh my gosh, how could we ever elect somebody like that? Well, however it happened, he became president. He was not my favorite person before the election, but I'll tell you what, those 4 years in office, the issues that he tackled and the policies that he put into place and the direction and the path that he put our country on is something that I think will make history books. I was very pleased with the outcome. Now, he wasn't a perfect person, but I loved his policies and the work that he did. Gabrielle, likewise, has some baggage. We all have some baggage. Ken Moore has some baggage, I'm sure. But the fact is, I believe I've gotten to know the woman because I helped her become alderman 2 years ago when she was elected there. And there were people saying she was never elected. She just assumed an empty chair. None of it's true. There's so much fallacy and wrong facts being attributed to this campaign.
Yeah, and so that they don't.
Where she's
I wanted to point the finger at me too, because I did hit on some of the minor ones. But back in Texas and Chicago, there was prostitution, money laundering. There's real stuff. But I have to say, I've been observing media and politics a long time, longer than I've been in media with a newspaper or podcast. But I've never seen a so-called investigative reporter so doggedly go after a candidate for 10 days in a row, and I'm sure it'll be tomorrow and the next day, so 12 days of the week. It's like the mayor's race in his town ended in Nashville, and immediately he jumped on this story. Have you seen it? I mean, maybe Monica Lewinsky and Hunter Biden on a national level, but small town mayor, have you ever seen it?
No, this obsession with attacking her is something I've never seen, and it's small ball, but it has long-lasting and negative effects on our community. I mean, I believe where Gabrielle, and she's very clear on the issues that are important to her and the kind of fiscal responsibility to, nobody's against growth, but managing this growth and being careful not to get ourselves into debt. We're already a couple of $100 million in debt, and the other side's very happy to remind us that we've got a AAA bond rating. Well, that's great. That means we can borrow more money if we want to. I would rather not borrow money. I'd rather build with money that we have, or at least get the very best.
Certainly not at 8%, but yeah. So I guess it's Jeremy's turn because he's had the most recent interview. But it's funny because Phil's breaking news comes right out of my interviews that are 2-3 weeks old, one back from April. Not the Texas and Chicago stuff, but definitely the local stuff. Although today's news cycle of neo-Nazis as her supporters showing up with her at the last town hall certainly didn't come up 2 weeks ago in our meeting. Anything to that? Do we accept that, or do we put it to bed? Who are these people? Why were they there? Why did she not disown them?
I think one of the guys who is part of this Tennessee, I forget what it's called, a Tennessee something. They're evidently white supremacists, this group. One of these guys is selling his home, and Gabrielle has listed this person's home. That's how they know one another. It's been said that she hired them and brought them here. They went public. In fact, it's a matter of public record, I think, in social media, where they said the fact that it's being said that Gabrielle hired us for security is absurd. We arrived because we understood that Antifa was being organized. Now, there's a gentleman in our community here that's whose name is quite well known. He runs a couple of internet rags that are very, very liberal, very attacking, very vicious. That is an organizer for Antifa, and it's been very publicly known that there has been a cell.
Is that my best friend Justin? Is that Justin, who probably is the other person who put me to bed? Yep, that's
the gentleman. I've never met
Tennessee Holler, folks.
Well, there you go.
Terrible situation.
And so evidently these guys, these supposed Nazis, these white supremacists, whatever the group's name is, said they came to just to protect free speech and everybody there, because they said where Antifa goes, we go to protect. They were not hired by, but it was not a good look, that's for sure, because Phil and his cameraman got some very nice shots of a couple of guys that look like, you wouldn't want to bring them home to meet mom for dinner.
So what I was doing before Twitter jail, coincidence, I don't think so, was trying, like you, to change the subject from one candidate's personal baggage to the actual issues of Franklin City and Williamson County. I had all three aldermen running against incumbents that were part of the council that made the votes mad, right? The incumbents are the ones who made everybody mad over the development projects, $100 million city hall, middle 8 high-rise and low-income housing, mass transit, and property tax hike possibly to pay for it all. Real stuff. Phil never picked any of those up. Just a woman swatting at his phone in his hand, etc. that night here in Westhaven. So what are the pocketbook issues Franklin will only hear if you say it now on my show?
Well, taxes is one thing. There's a 65, I think it's a $65 million walking bridge over Interstate 65 being proposed. We need $65 million spent on that, like we need another hole in our head. The $100 million city hall, when in fact there are alternatives. And the challenge is that a lot of the business that's been conducted that has been overseen by the incumbent mayor has been done behind closed doors. In meetings not involving those that are to our elected representatives, our aldermen, our city council members, to examine, to unwrap, and then vote on things. These things have been done and decisions being made between developers, maybe a subcommittee that nobody knows how you get on these committees that the mayor approves, and then he brings the subject, for example, like the $100 million decision to build a brand new city hall right there on the current spot, where it's not the ideal situation there, and it doesn't produce any tax revenue if in fact we sold it to a developer and they put in boutiques, stores, restaurants. It would be a tax revenue generating, and we should move the city hall perhaps to where the police station is. Every small hamlet I've ever lived in, the city hall, the town hall was next to the police station. We've got a great site. We could probably save 40%, put $40 million back in the bank and build something with a Class A office space for about 60 million. But the decision was made and then presented to the board of aldermen and said, well, you better vote on this because we've already decided to do it. And that
a very large developer had to invite the press, by the way, that night. Social issues too. Yeah. Pride Festival 3.0 will be voted on again next year. Obviously, the makeup of the aldermen and the mayor matter for that. Maybe a transgender parade down Main Street. Vanderbilt Health was a sponsor last year of the Pride Festival, big employer around here and big political player with lots of money. They had a book, actually a booth, recruiting 15-year-olds to get paid to participate in their gender study experiments.
Yep.
Not exactly Franklin values, not exactly don't do that in a small town type of Jason Aldean stuff. Not family friendly, let's put it that way. What activated you and your group, Westhaven Voters, to Fairness and Civility the most?
Well, speaking of that Pride Fest, my wife and I attended. We went June 2nd to the farm, the county park, and just to have an eyeball on it, because we knew that the mayor had not attended, yet he was the expert enough to vote that this was acceptable in our community. And people were saying at that time, well, this won't have any far-reaching effects. This is not setting any precedent. Well, what has happened in the Tennessee legislature, there was a law passed by the Tennessee General Assembly which made drag performances in public spaces where children could be exposed illegal. Now in Knoxville this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there's a 3-day Pride Fest. They said celebrate, pride, and protest. And they are in, I forget the county that they're in, but they're scoffing at the state law because they said there will definitely be drag performances. If you go to their website, Knox Pride, KNOX Pride, you'll see the debauchery from the previous year's event and what they're saying overtly: come after us. I don't care if it's a law, sue us. And that's what's happening. It's a slippery slope, Steve, when we allow, in an ideal little conservative hamlet like Franklin, Tennessee, where 2,000 people a year have been moving in over the past 20 years, that this doesn't have an effect elsewhere. I think there's a lot of eyes on this particular election because I think the liberal wing of the electorate wants to take Franklin, because then they can take Williamson County. And if Williamson County goes, there goes Tennessee, and we'll be blue.
That's part of the 4,000 county strategy. We talk about that quite a bit. They also violated a guy's religious liberty for arresting him wearing a Jesus Save shirt and took Bibles out of old ladies' handbags at the gate. So the Franklin Police Department, under the direction, I guess, of the mayor, although he wasn't there, somebody had to make the call. That lawsuit will cost him quite a bit too, maybe more than it cost for that overpass on 65. But speaking of civility, and I only got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
There is a Mayor Moore-backed push for terror markers, little or big, actually, monuments to lynchings in Franklin. The first person lynched was a Jewish guy, but never mind. They want to spotlight forever where Black slaves or just Black people were hung, even the criminals, making out that we're racist, Klans folks. Who would want that besides BLM? You didn't move to Franklin, Tennessee because we were embarrassed of our racist past that you had nothing to do with, not moving here till a year ago. And that's 200 years old.
And if that side wasn't erasing great square inches, which become great square acres of our history, of our real history, and wanting to focus on something like that, I'm all in favor of bringing history to life and letting people know the good, bad, and the otherwise from our history. But the curriculum in today's schools, the effort to erase 1776 and replace it with some 1619 nonsense, and the effort to indoctrinate our kids, not just sexually, but socially and civically, and take away the fabric of the lexicon, the conversation that was begun by our founding fathers, and to replace it with lynching markers. I'm personally not in favor of it, but we could have a discussion again about history and its place, and the thoroughness of teaching history to our younger generation. Kate and I love to mentor the younger generation, and they're being shortchanged in today's educative system, sadly.
Yeah, I'd rather see it at the Williamson County Library in the same section where they got the kids' books that are age inappropriate for 5 and under, but that's another story. Early voting began yesterday, October 4th, and runs through October 19th. I, for one, will be very glad when it's over. They are even open Columbus Day, October 9th, so not very patriotic or traditional, let's say. What do you know about this election and election integrity? That was a big issue leading up to last year. We talked about it on this show very many times. Nothing was done after last election on the state or federal level, really, but Williamson County is where Franklin is, actually bought ES&S machines instead of leasing them, even with all their bugs and flags. You mentioned Frank Limpus. He's been on here telling us that was a bad idea. They did it anyway. The term Tennessee error, by the way, became famous nationwide from Gabrielle's first race for alderman. Did you know that?
Yeah, exactly right.
That she was the victim of Tennessee error for the first time. So tell us what election integrity issues we have to be on the lookout for now that voting started yesterday.
Well, there was a very celebrated incident in Maricopa County during the midterm elections where ironically, in GOP districts or voting centers, voters would get there and say, and these were the machines, say, oh, sorry, the machines are down, you can't vote. I don't know how many people were turned away and couldn't exercise their franchise to vote because of that. So machines and all of the hair, the baggage that's around these machines relative to our concerns about fraud and election integrity issues in general, I think almost without exclusion, the people I talk with who understand the challenges with voting machines and all the controversies surrounding ES&S and ESS and the other machines, Dominion voting machines, and the millions of dollars that we've now committed to buy brand new ESS machines, would prefer paper ballots. And I don't see why, even on a small model scale basis, it would be untenable in this area. But
it's cheaper. It's way cheaper. There's only
way cheaper.
70,000 people, 80,000 residents, maybe 30,000 voters, although there was only a 7% turnout. So we're really talking about 10,000 ballots to count. You could do that in 15 minutes. Okay, back to your press release before we run out of time. With kudos to you for issuing that. Someone besides me noticing this was not going well. I wish it was Knoxville or Chattanooga or Memphis and not my city, but I get more clicks. So here. Washington Voters for Fairness and Civility noted that a number of self-identified left-wing activists, some of whom do not even live in Franklin, but are attempting to influence the election, have in recent days made veiled threats and even posted the addresses on the internet of Westhaven residents who support Ms. Hansen. It appears these activists fear their preferred candidate for mayor cannot win on the merits of his record. We hope the Franklin Police Department will take note of these hateful and threatening social media posts and hold those responsible accountable. Excuse me, said co-founder Larry Liebert. One came to my house. One was caught on video trespassing on Gabrielle's property and digging in her trash. Don't know why. What did Franklin PD, Moore's campaign, and maybe other local media like the Herald or WAKM radio, if anyone's ever even heard of that, said? Any support at all? And on my show with the alderman, they were holding the chief of police of Franklin somewhat responsible for mismanagement for the soccer coach who accidentally was discovered on his own cell phone, leaving it behind, for abusing many, many kids, with many more kids to come in this small town.
Yep.
Yeah, many years. And this is a very small town, so that is obviously huge, but you don't hear anything about that. What support are you getting besides the ones who shut you down?
Steve, there's been virtual silence. There have been crickets from all the other media outlets. I don't believe, to my knowledge, that the police have undertaken any investigation of the reports of vandalism, threats, and so forth. I know that Gabrielle Hansen is coming out of pocket to pay, not the white supremacists, not the skinheads, paying a security team to accompany her wherever she goes, meet and greets, interviews, shopping, because of the threats that have come against her. And it's, I could understand this if this were a large national election and there were major issues, but this is all politics is local. This is our local little city council in our town. There's 6,000 residents in our neighborhood, Steve, here in Westhaven. I was I don't know if I said this yet on air, but just for a few minutes before we went on air, I was given the finger by a neighbor that walked by and saw my conservative candidate signs. Yep. It's sad that a simple call for fairness and civility would have touched such a raw nerve that has caused so many people to get up.
It's quite shocking. And that's why I took episode 80 down in April. They came to her house in her daughter's workplace. We don't do that on this show, but the left doesn't play. They play for keeps. Okay, last
doxed.
one.
Yeah,
docs,
absolutely.
My own house. I have cameras. Yeah. So, okay, what's the future for you? Back to Broadway or real estate? These interest rates, I'm sure Broadway would be less stressful. Not the politics, though. And I want to end on this note. This is not the kind of behavior that has made Franklin such a wonderful place in which to live and work. Liebert continued. We call on Mayor Moore to denounce such threats and name calling and show leadership by urging the public to be fair, civil, and respectful of everyone. That's why it's such a great place. We'll see if Ken Moore wins, how he goes about the job of leading after all this. Maybe the silver lining will be he acts less purple, as Gabrielle called him, and listens to the residents. Think he's going to win?
It's a toss-up at this point. I think the effort to smear her has been very effective. Some of it's been self-inflicted by some of the misstatements she's made. But our hope is that this simple call for fairness and civility, I would like to challenge each of the candidates, from Ken Moore right down through the incumbents, all of the conservative candidates and their constituents and support groups, to commit to this very simple call for fairness and civility in the remaining time. We'd be curious to see if they say yay or nay to that. If they say no, they're painting themselves. I mean, who could come against the simple call for fairness and civility? No threatening. We are a group of people committed to free speech here in Westhaven, open dialogue, transparency, fairness, truthfulness, respect, and decency. And we call upon candidates and their supporters for the very, very same thing.
Yeah, and I was just on the radio making a bet with Matt Murphy. He said 15% turnout, and I took the under. So I hope he proves me wrong, and I hope it's way above that, because if nothing will move the needle, it's this. But I want to thank you for your time and effort for civility and the issues sorely lacking. We are at the end here, though, so tell everyone where they can go to find out more about you and follow your social media, or maybe even buy a book or album of yours.
Well, if you want to buy my wife's books, they're all on Amazon. I'm a relatively new realtor, and I have all the socials, Facebook and Instagram and so forth. But my biggest concern right now is that we retain what we all moved and now love about Franklin, Tennessee. That we retain the small town charm, the fiscal responsibility, the managed growth, and this wonderful, lovely, family friendly place in which to live. So
Awesome.
That's my plea. Get out and vote your conscience, but learn the facts before you simply knee jerk pull the lever for somebody that you've just heard is the right person to vote for.
Yes, and don't just mindlessly vote for those aldermen either. Get the facts and watch my show.
Exactly.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike, very much. We'll hope to
Thank you, Steve.
see you again soon.
Pleasure.
I don't understand how you ever did without me. I don't understand how I bring you down to your knees.
1 year later, and it's still a toe tapper. I like that song. Welcome to the Steve and Steve segment of our show where we cover what we just heard, not that song. Producer Steve, what do you think of our guest, Mike Battistelli?
Oh, it was great to hear. The King and I, my wife and I happened to be able to go to the King and I musical in Seattle probably 25 years ago. So it wasn't that one, I don't believe, but fabulous show, wonderful thing. And the fact that his wife got chosen over the lead is an amazing thing. It tells you a little bit about the caliber of these individuals and that he was in the orchestra pit. And then God transported him out of that situation, Broadway, and then moved him on to where they're at today. And we didn't even get into his homeschool advocacy and all that kind of thing. But he's a power to be beholden. I mean, he is
and
a guy.
His daughter is an amazing singer who gave it all up to raise 6 kids. So God bless her and God bless that family.
Another great guest. Another great interview.
Steve, what a week. Update on Twitter files. Hopefully final chapter of this farce. I'm out of jail. Death sentence commuted. And I quote, "We're writing to let you know that we've unsuspended your account. We're sorry." There it is. "For the inconvenience and hope to see you back on Twitter soon." Oh yeah. A little background. Okay, listen to this. We have a system that we have systems that find and remove multiple automated spam accounts in bulk. Remember now, I'm a blue checkmark verified account on Twitter media, and yours was flagged as spam by mistake. Thanks, Twitter. And the day after early voting began in Franklin, sorry, Queen, Phil Williams, city attorney chick, and school board shorty, cry more. So you can once again check me out on @MillCreekView, now back on Twitter, Always Getter, Truth, and Facebook. What did I learn? Got to learn from things like this in life, right? Number 1, I'm on Twitter too much. Number 2, there are some real dumbasses that I call trolls out there. And so my new rule is if they don't have more followers on them than I have on me, as of today, 637, #mute, #instablock, and no replies. Not worth it. All right, some real news. The U.S. added another $33 billion of debt in one day yesterday, bringing the 2-day total to $308 billion, $500 billion in 15 days since crossing $33 trillion. That's an average $1.4 billion per hour. Debt to GDP above 120%. Totally unsustainable. Steve, any comments on my Twitter feed or debt?
Well, I am so happy you didn't tell me ahead of time. So I am wonderful news. God came through for you. I am so thankful because I've been praying for blessings over you. You are doing a lot of work to get what you're doing out there, and people don't understand all that goes behind the scenes that Steve does, that we do, and others to make this happen. So I'm very, very glad, very joyful that you're back on Twitter and you're back on X.
And I do post daily biblical verses, so it's not all just vitriol and hate.
That's right.
But anyway,
but
we are dealing with some folks we just can't relate to on a constitutional, legal, even human level. There are demons among us, truly, yes. I tell you. Here's one such example. Quote, this is a headline: "Gloves are off, families are on." Huh? David Brock threatens to target the children of GOP members investigating Hunter Biden by Cullen Linebarger. As the walls close in on the Biden crime family, Democrats are starting to resort to desperate tactics to save them. One prominent leftist operative going to the extreme and looking at hitting Republicans close to home. Tara Palmieri of Puck News reported last Friday that David Brock will be launching a personal investigation into family members of Republican lawmakers, looking for any instances where they may have benefited from that member's position. Now, once upon a time, they wouldn't go after Amy Carter, they wouldn't go after Chelsea Clinton, they wouldn't go after the Bush girls, the twins, but here we are. Gloves are off, families are on, Brock said to Palmieri. Brock is specifically looking at targeting the children of these Republican congressional members, House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan, maybe next Speaker of the House, I hope he goes after him in return, and House Oversight Chair Jim Comer, the only one telling us about the wires received from China and Moscow. Brock's fingerprints ended up on a New York Times piece, including mentions of tawdry allegations of abuse and an abortion. Tara Palmieri said. David Brock is a now liberal political consultant, author, and commentator who founded Media Matters for America. Hopefully you all know who that is. He was a right-wing investigative reporter and a conservative commentator before switching sides and writing books and articles critical of Bill and Hillary Clinton back in the day. He also founded super PACs and founded Facts First USA. The far-left activist and former conservative journalist announced he will be leaving his role as chairman of Media Matters for America, Media Matters Action Network, and American Bridge. American Bridge, 21st Century, his full name, is tracking Republicans' anti-abortion positions, protecting democracy by focusing on extremist down-ballot Republicans. We just had a show about one, threatening our elections and touting the Biden administration and Democrats' record of results for families and businesses. Kind of funny. Famed liberal author Christopher Hitchinson, rest in peace, derided Brock's book, The Real Anita Hill, as an exercise in self-love disguised as an exercise in self-denial. I miss him. I wanted to take an extra shower after trudging through this dismally written, pick-nose, spiteful, and furtive little book. It glitters with malice and the more cowardly kind of disclosure. It's a dank, filthy tissue turned inside out, wrote Hitchens. Wow. But yet he's gone and Brock is still with us. Did I strike any chords with you, Steve? Anything on that?
Steve, when you can't defend your cause, then retaliation by character assassination is all these people can do, because their cause and their individuals that they stand for are absurd. They're just wicked. And therefore they know they can't stand up and say, oh, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good. So instead they turn their vitriol on people like you, people like our guest and others, and just scream at them and go character assassination, just drive at them. But they're not even pointing out anything about the true issues.
What did Mike just say? Flip off your yard sign. So you're
right.
really mean with an inanimate object.
Yep.
Talk to them face to face and they cower like paper. All right. The verdict is in. Liberals and liberalism get very little correct. Headline: paper straws contain toxic forever chemicals. Could be worse than plastic. Paper straws might not be the eco-friendly drinking tube they've been promoted to be. Belgian researchers found that these so-called green utensils are toxic and therefore potentially worse for the environment than their much vilified plastic counterparts, according to a new study published in the journal Food Additives and Contaminants. That must be an interesting magazine to read. Wow. Straws made from plant-based materials such as paper and bamboo are often advertised as being more sustainable and eco-friendly than those made from plastic. Themo Grofen, PhD, study author and an environmental scientist at the University of Antwerp, said in a statement, however, the presence of PFAS, poly and perfluoroalkyl-based substances known as forever chemicals, because they last for a long time, because breaking down in these straws means that's not necessarily true. The new research comes following multiple initiatives enforced by numerous U.S. cities, including New York City, and restaurant chains to ban disposable plastic suckers comprised of propylene and polystyrene, which takes hundreds of years to decompose and are linked to health problems from liver problems to birth defects. Their time has come and gone. I believe we should get rid of plastic straws, New York City Mayor de Blasio said in 2018, after the city council introduced a proposal to prohibit restaurants and bars from distributing plastic sippers. Researchers analyzed the PFA concentrations of 39 brands of drinking straws, which were comprised of 5 materials: paper, bamboo, glass, stainless steel, and plastic. They found that paper straws were the most PFA filled, with a whopping 90% of paper straws containing the chemicals. Meanwhile, bamboo straws, another highly touted green alternative, clocked in second with 80%, followed by 75% for plastic straws, 40% of glass straws, and none in steel straws. Although that's gross because you have to wash them all the time. If you don't, that's gross. By far the most prevalent PFA was perfluorooctanic acid, sorry, not a biogeneticist, which has been banned globally since 2020. However, this substance is still manufactured in some countries and could be present in products bought by U.S. consumers. Also present were trifluoroacetic acid and trifluoromethensulfuric acid, PFAS, which easily dissolves in water, meaning they could potentially leach out of straws into beverages, you think? The presence of PFAS in paper and bamboo straws shows they are not necessarily biodegradable, warned Grolfen. Not to mention that some of these so-called 100% recyclable straws are actually anything but. It's unclear how these substances, which have been used since the 1940s to repel water and grease in everything from cookware to carpets, ended up in the straws, although the presence of them in every brand suggests they were added on purpose as a liquid repellent. Other potential PFA sources could be the soil the plant-based materials were grown in, as well as the water used in their manufacturing, per phys.org, phys.org. You can go look it up. In light of the findings, Golfin deduced that plant-based straws are perhaps an environmental paper tiger and that there is perhaps only one true eco-friendly alternative to plastics. Quote, "We did not detect any PFAS in stainless steel straws, so I would advise consumers to use this type of straw or just avoid straws at all." Ah, brilliant. Nobody makes money on no straws.
No straw, Steve.
Right. Good for you. Me either. Hey, look at this. Don't California my Tennessee. All right. FDA approved 65% of new drugs in 2022 based on a single study.
Steve, this is Buc-ee's.
Hey, I've been to Buc-ee's. I should have worn my shirt. I would have known. The 21st Century Cures Act was created to help accelerate medical product development and bring new innovations and advances to patients quicker and more efficient. Yet, some research suggests the law is being used to bypass the once rigorous and evidence-based standard for new drug approvals, allowing novel drugs to flood the market without adequate data and public transparency. According to a research letter published on August 8th in the Journal of the American Medical Association Network, Open JAMA, 24 of the 37 drugs approved in 2022 by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, were based on a single study, with only 4 drugs having more than 3 studies to support their approval. Quote, "I'm not surprised," David Gortler, a pharmacologist, pharmacist, and FDA reform advocate at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, told the Epoch Times in an email. Despite the 2017 rule promising, quote, "aggressive enforcement and stiff penalties," the NIH and FDA haven't penalized sponsors who haven't followed the requirements. The FDA in 2019 stated that it wouldn't enforce penalties of up to $12,103 per day for failing to report a trial's results until the agency issued further guidance on how it'll exercise its power. Related, New York Times had this to say: wealthiest hospitals got billions in bailout for struggling health providers. 20 large chains received more than, not 1 billion, not 2 billion, not 3 billion, $5 billion in federal grants, even while sitting on more than $100 billion in cash. But never mind. Next generation of COVID-19 vaccines and therapies gets a $1.4 billion boost. And you wonder why we're $33.4 trillion in debt? The Biden administration on Tuesday announced a $1.4 billion investment in developing the so-called next generation of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. You know, the one that's pretty much gone now? Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra and Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, Don O'Connell, made the announcement saying the funding is part of the $5 billion program they hope will help the country get ahead of any future changes in COVID-19, which you can't possibly do. This is an investigation in expanding our country's ability to respond to the future variants that we might see coming out of COVID. The future variants, I mean, if they're future variants, how do we know what they are? It's crazy. Becerra said, it's an investment in better protecting all of our community, including those who are immunocompromised because of the vaccine and who don't respond well to the existing vaccines, which is nobody. The $1.4 billion in funding should allow clinical trials for a new monoclonal antibody to start this autumn, with clinical trials for a new COVID-19 vaccine starting as soon as the winter, O'Connell said. Get ready, it's going to happen all over again. Project NextGen is operationalizing the lessons we've learned about the COVID-19 virus, no, they're not, to broaden the nation's medicine cabinet and increase protections for all communities, O'Connell said. $1 billion for four phase 2B clinical trial studies on a COVID-19 vaccine. That funding will go to, well, here's the kicker. That funding will go to Icon Government and Public Health Solutions, Inc. of Hinckley, Ohio, Farm Olam, LLC of Houston, Texas, Technical Resources International, TRI, Inc. of Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of DC, and Rowe Federal Systems, Inc., Durham, North Carolina. Ooh, where it all started. Don't get me started on that. $326 million to Regeneron, heard of them, $100 million to Global Health Investment Corp., a nonprofit organization that is managing an investment portfolio known as BARDA Ventures, referring to the federal agency called Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. Sounds like DARPA to me. $10 million to Johnson & Johnson. Let's listen to clip number one for a break.
The trick they got together with the propaganda was making it so that you're responsible for other people's lives. So I can be labeled a murderer, and people would really believe that. That's powerful. It's very clever. That's where it steps into sadism for me, the photographs of the people on buses with masks on saying, don't let their sacrifice be in vain. Phew, that's bad. That's bad. It's very dark. It's very dark. It's victimization is what it is. I was reading 1984 all through this, and there's something he says, how do you have full control of people? And he said, fear. He said, no, not fear. Suffering is how you get full control of people. And that's what it's come to. But it's psychological suffering, but it's amounts to the same thing. And I experience it. You get caught in the trap. Well, can you believe what your heart tells you is right? Or is it going against the narrative? Can I talk about how I feel to my family? And it doesn't get riskier than that.
Yeah, and he knows. He suffered big time.
Thank you, Eric Clapton. Just so everyone knows who that was, vaccine injured, globally famous guitar player. More from him at the end. Cream, great band. I'd rather hear that than get a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Why did I play that? Records reveal Fauci, others, made over $300 billion from the COVID pandemic while Americans suffered, by Sarah Arnold, townhall.com. You can go look it up. According to records, the former NIH director, Dr. Francis Collins, and former NIAID director, Dr. Anthony Fauci, made huge profits from royalty checks during the Chinese virus-fueled pandemic. At the same time, thousands of people struggled to put food on the table, and Mr. Clapton got injured. Open the Books, a transparency organization, recently released over 1,500 unredacted records revealing the leaders of the country's National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, that was Fauci's gig, profited off the virus that killed thousands of people, maybe millions. On top of that, Fauci funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology to research the coronavirus. The records show Collins and Fauci got 58 royalty payments from allowing companies to use their COVID-19 vaccines, which in return was developed with funding from the U.S. taxpayers by private pharmaceutical firms, some of the ones we just named, I bet. So in other words, the COVID pandemic was one big ploy for the government to get massively wealthy, she said. Through the Freedom of Information Act, 56,000 transactions were recorded, totaling over $325 million banked by the quote-unquote experts. Between 2010 and 2021, Fauci received 37 payments from 3 entities, including 15 from Santa Cruz Biotechnology, which ranks 5th in royalty payments. Fauci also received 14 from Ansell Corp. And 8 from Chiron Corp., which was later bought by Novartis, allowing the company to obtain significant NIH funds. According to Open the Books, names and license numbers for each payment is absent from the records, data that the NIH initially withheld but was later forced to release by a court. This information is essential to know if there was any potential conflicts of interest, she says. Records also show that Fauci, the highest paid federal worker with a 2022 salary of $480,000, failed to donate his royalties to charity as promised. Next story, next person, next demon. The Swiss billionaire Hans-Georg Weiss has a profound interest in American politics. Over the years, he has pumped $475 million, more than Fauci made. He has earned manufacturing medical devices into left-wing advocacy groups, $72 million in 2021 alone, according to a new report from the conservative watchdog group Americans for Public Trust. Did you catch the part where I said Swiss billionaire? That's not supposed to happen. Advocacy to a biography, according to a biography of Weiss written by his sister, Weiss's goal is not to bend laws to his business's advantage, but to, quote, reinterpret the American Constitution in the light of progressive politics. Interesting for a Swiss national. Although foreigners are prohibited from donating money directly to political causes, Weiss has donated lavishly to progressive political organizations. Critics argue that Weiss's largesse illuminates a gaping loophole in the political finance that essentially allows wealthy foreigners to launder their contributions, one that has been exploited far more robustly by Democrats than Republicans, according to RealClearInvestigations.com. Not me, but it's true. Marne Banks, a spokesperson for the 2 organizations most responsible for Weiss's political giving, told RCI, Real Clear Investigations, that the Weiss Foundation and Burger Action Fund prohibits their grants from being used to support or oppose political candidates or parties or to fund get out the vote or voter registration activities, she said. Both organizations comply with the rules and laws governing their activities, and they support increasing transparency in our campaign finance system. Based on this record, including STF's 1630 funds admitted spending, its grants to politically active grant recipients and its payments, it appears that there is reason to believe that by 2020, STF had the major purpose of influencing a federal election, notes the report. The FEC's general counsel reports went on to conclude that 1630 and a subsidiary organization, the Hub Project, had likely violated the law by not registering as political committees. Quote, there is also not currently enough information in the record to conclude that Weiss made indirect political contributions that would be used for electoral purposes. The report validated a number of concerns raised by Americans for Public Trust, specifically included that the 1630 Fund, a key part of Arabella Advisors network and funnel for Weiss's money, had spent the lion's share of its budget on electoral politics. The organization spent $400 million in 2020, which included a whopping $128 million to America Votes, a progressive organization that declares its mission to, quote, win elections in key states. On its website, registering as a super PAC would have also made it clear the fund could not accept foreign donations, something which the FEC has previously cracked down on. In 2019, the FEC fined a Jeb Bush super PAC $940,000 for taking in donations from a Chinese corporation. However, since the FEC took no enforcement action, the conclusions of the FEC's general counsel were not binding. The 1630 Fund is still not registered as a political committee as we speak. Brock and Weiss, FDA and Fauci's of the world, that's who we're dealing with. Bad dudes with their own interest always first in mind. Stay tuned for my thoughts of the day. Welcome to my quotes for the day. But before I share, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to Mill Creek View Podcast. That's Tennessee, Washington, and now Florida. I'll be on vacation next week, but we'll be running CEO specials. So don't worry, I did not kill myself. Just go to Rumble or Spotify or iTunes, search for Mill Creek View and hit the subscribe button and follow us. Be sure to check out our new business show, the CEO special, which you'll hear next week, where I interview great guests doing good business. And I hope you like it. Give my regards to Broadway, George M. Cohan. The dumbing down of the country reflects itself on Broadway. The shows get dumber and the public gets used to them. Stephen Sondheim. Not very nice. They bring in their trees and stand them up on the pavements so that swaths of Broadway are suddenly transformed into dark, pine-scented avenues. Deborah Mailer. They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway. They say there's always magic in the air. The Drifters. I love the Broadway audiences who relish live drama and don't hesitate to display their enthusiasm. Ian McKellen, remember him? Sir Ian McKellen is an English actor with a career spanning more than 6 decades. He is noted for his roles on the screen and stage in genre ranging from Shakespearean dramas and modern theater to popular fantasy and science fiction. Magneto in the X-Men movies. There's nothing that can match Broadway for stature and dignity. Sammy Davis Jr. Being on Broadway is the modern equivalent of being a monk. I sleep a lot, eat a lot, and rest a lot. Hugh Jackman. He forgot pray a lot. Also, the X-Men movies, Wolverine. That's it for this episode. Thank you, Mike Battistelli, for your simple idea and plea for civility. Too bad Channel 5 in Nashville didn't care to heed it. Until next time, this is your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of mcview.us. Peace in our time and glory to God. Early voting is open in Franklin, folks. Let's see if you can move the needle up from 7% voter participation 2 years ago. Let's go out on Eric Clapton, since we played that clip, and stick around for a bonus feature, me this AM on Final Countdown, freshly out of Twitter jail, given clemency by Elon for now, about Trump's gag order and Star Chamber with Manila Chan and Ted Rall. I hope you like it.
Once upon a time, down on 47th Street, I met a fine chick, tried to knock her off her feet. Now all alone, I thought she was playing, and didn't know that I was a real sugar man. But she fooled